Seches Gitin Daf Yud Zayin contains two distinct sugyas, split apart by one Mishnah. The first sugya is the Gemara analyzes the last case in our previous Mishnah and has a very similar exchange to the two that we had in the last daf. Then the Gemara gets to our new Mishnah, which discusses the topic of the time written on the get, the date. The Gemara is going to want to know what is the reason that a get contains a date. Two explanations, and we'll compare and contrast how well we can understand them and how they fit into various Mishnahs. So let's begin. The Gemara is discussing the case in the Mishnah where three people testified about the B'fanei Nachtav and B'fanei Nachtam of the get, and we'll discuss who is the ones holding the get. It says that one person testified to the writing. He said, I was written in front of me. I saw the writing of the get. And two people testified to the signing of the get. So this, the Mishnah says, everybody agrees is kosher. So the Gemara wants to know why. So the Gemara quotes Rav Ami, says name of Rav Yechanan. We're talking about where the one who was testifying to the writing that is the B'fanei Nachtav, he's the one who was holding it. That way he has namanis because he's the shliach. And the other two have namanis because they are two witnesses. So each factor has adequate testimony. The writing because it's the shliach, and the signatures because you have two edim. Now, if, however, you would have the two that are testifying about the signatures are the ones holding the get, then the one who's testifying about the writing is not holding anything. That's no good. The testimony isn't good, and the halacha would be that it would be puzzle here. So the Gemara says, you see here clearly something. This is very similar to what we said in our last Gemara. You see that if two people bring a get, you still have B'fanei Nachtam concerns. You still have to say that. We had a tzad to say that you wouldn't have to say that because the whole reason, at least according to one explanation, the whole reason for saying B'fanei Nachtam is so we should be able to establish that the signatures are valid, and we're afraid that we won't be able to get people to testify to the validity of the signatures if it was written far away. But here two people are bringing it, so they would be able to testify. So you may think B'fanei Nachtam is not an issue if two people are bringing it. But here we're saying that if two people are bringing it, and it's the two that are saying B'fanei Nachtam, and there's only one who's not bringing saying B'fanei Nachtav, it's puzzle. So obviously you don't say that. You still say that that is an issue. You have to worry about B'fanei Nachtav and B'fanei Nachtam even when two people are bringing the get. So Marcos Rav Asi was a kasha, because now let's look back at the previous case where we said that if two people say B'faneinu Nachtav and one says B'faneinu Nachtam, there we said it's a machlokes between Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim. The Tanna Kama, that is the Chachamim, say it's puzzle, and Rav Yehuda says it's kosher. Says the Gemara, according to what you are telling me, in that case, the Rabbanan should puzzle it even if two people are the ones carrying the get, because you're telling me even when there are two people, you still have to say B'fanei Nachtam, and you don't have it being said properly here. You don't have complete testimony on both of those. So the Gemara says that he said yes. Rav Ami said, in Rav Yechanan, yes, I would say that the Rabbanan puzzle in that case as well. So now the Gemara realized it was a different time that he found him, and he was saying shir, and he said the opposite. And he said that the case where we said where you have two people saying that they saw the chasima, the signature, and one saying that he saw the ksiva, the writing, that is kosher. That's even if the get is being carried by the two witnesses who are testifying to the chasima. So obviously the explanation here is that when a get is being brought by two, you don't have to worry about B'fanei Nachtav at all. Exact opposite of what we said before. Because if there is a B'fanei Nachtav requirement, it's not being fulfilled here because the only person who's saying B'fanei Nachtav is only one person, and he's not a shliach. He's not even bringing the get. So says the Gemara, so therefore you're telling me that when two people bring a get, you are not concerned with B'fanei Nachtav issues. So if that's true, let's look back at the previous case. That would mean that then here Rav Asi asks, look back at the previous case. That means there where you had two who said B'faneinu Nachtav and one who said B'faneinu Nachtam, that it's machlokes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanna Kama says it's puzzle, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. Over there also it's referring to where the get is not being held by both of them. But if the get would be being held by two people, you would say it's kosher over there. So he said, yes, the Rabbanan would be machshir in that case, because like I said, the get is being held by two people. So yes, but you just told me before. Otherwise, you told me that in that case it would passel. So he said, this is the peg that you should rely on, which will not move. Meaning this second version is the version which is acceptable. Okay, that finishes that sugya. Now we get to our next sugya, which talks about the time that's written on the get. So the get had the date written on it. So the Gemara discusses if the signing and the writing of the get didn't happen the same day, or if they did happen the same day, when is the date valid? Now, as we know, in Judaism, the night begins the day. So the change of the date from, let's say, the first day of the month to the second day of the month happens at nightfall. So the night is the same date as the daylight period that follows it. The Gemara gives 3 examples where the writing and the signing of the get are the same date, and therefore it's kosher. And then we'll talk about where it's possible. So if it was written during the day and signed that same day, or if it was written at night and signed that same night, or even if it was written at night and signed within the same 24 hours, that is, it was signed the next day, all those are kosher. However, if it was written during the day and not signed till night, so at nightfall the date changed, so now the date that's written on the get is wrong, because the get is not really valid until it's signed. That's when you can use it. But the date that's written on is for the previous day, so that implies that it's from an earlier date, which is not true, and it's wrong. That's a Tanna Kamma's opinion. And Rosh Shimon disagrees. Rosh Shimon says it's kosher. As Rosh Shimon says, although that would be a problem by other types of contracts, because those contracts make a difference. For example, if you make a loan, so if the date written on the loan is yesterday, but the loan doesn't really take effect till tomorrow, and then the person who borrowed the money goes and sells property in the meantime, so the collector wants to come collect, he'll collect from the properties, because he'll say these were sold after my loan was created, while in truth the loan wasn't created until after the properties were sold, and therefore there is no lien on them. Now, that's all true on other types of contracts, but a get is just a document that creates a halachic difference of status. There's no collecting of money involved, and therefore Reb Shimon says you don't have to worry about the date being accurate. Now the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know generally, why is there a concept of a date at all on a get? If you, like Reb Shimon said, there shouldn't be a date at all, because you're not collecting anything. So the Gemara gives 2 reasons, 2 potential problems that will happen if you don't have the date. One is Rav Yechon, one is Rish Lakish, and the Gemara will compare the 2. So Rav Yechon says, we're afraid that the person is going to write the get in a way that will allow his wife to get away with his nus. Let's say she was mazana, and let's say he, instead of being angry at her, wants to protect her. The Gemara suggests that perhaps she's his niece, she's his sister's daughter, which he's allowed to marry. So he wants to protect her. So now she stands to get the death penalty for her infidelity, but he'll give her a get. You won't know that the get was given after the infidelity and she was married at the time of the infidelity. She'll bring the get to court and say, here, I have a get, so I was divorced at the time of my infidelity, and therefore she'll get off scot-free. We don't want that to happen. We don't want people getting away with things, and therefore we say there has to be a date on it, and that way we'll know that it was written after the infidelity and not before. That's a Yechanan's pshat. Rish Lakish's pshat is that when the woman brings, let's say, fields into the marriage, so the husband has the use of the fields and he collects the fruits, that refers to the use of anything as well as fruits of a field. He keeps all those while they're married. As soon as they're divorced, it belongs to her. So she needs to be able to prove when it transfers to her possession, because what if he goes and he keeps on selling them? So she has to demand it back from him in court. She has to prove when he wasn't allowed to sell it anymore so he could take them back from him, or even from the people that he sold it to. She has to be able to prove when he wasn't allowed to sell them any longer. So Mara's first issue is, why do they each not want to say like each other? So Rish Lakish, who says it's because of the fruits and the usage, didn't want to take a Yechanan because his nose is uncommon, and it's unlikely we would make a takana that every get has to have a date for this unlikely scenario. Now Rav Yechon didn't want to say like Rish Lakish because Rish Lakish holds that the husband has the right to keep the fruits. The fruits are his, actually, up until the get is given. So the date at the writing is not the accurate time that his ownership of the fruits and the usage ends. It ends when it's given. So having the date on it wouldn't help. You'd have to be able to prove it a different way. You'd have to bring witnesses when the get was actually given, so it makes no difference that we have a date written on it, which only tells me when it was written and signed. Okay, now the Gemara starts bringing a proof, and the first one is from Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said that you don't need to worry about the date. It's kosher even if the get was signed on the day following the date that's written. So, and he said because you don't have to have a date. So what would be the explanation? So according to Yochanan, says the Gemara, you have a problem. According to Reish Lakish, it's good. Why? Because according to Reish Lakish, I could say as follows. Reb Shimon holds that the time that you collect, the husband owns the fruits only until he decides to divorce her. From that point, they're not his any longer, and she can really take them away. So even if the date that's on the gate is yesterday, and the get is not actually valid until tomorrow, it's fine, because the husband actually loses possession of the fruit from yesterday, from the time that the date says, not from the time that the get was actually signed and given. And therefore it matches to what the actual halach is. It's not an issue. So if Reb Shimon holds that way, that's why he would say it's not an issue. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could still have a problem. What if she was mazana between the time that's written on the get and the time that's actually used? You'll have a scenario where she's guilty because she was married at the time of the znos, but she'll be able to pull out the get, which is dated prior to the time of her znos. So what's Rabbi Yochanan going to do? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan will say, I was not talking in Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon agrees with Reish Lakish's opinion. I was talking in the Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan hold of my explanation. So now the Gemara goes, okay, let's try another proof here. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you understand what the argument between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim center around. Why they argue as to what is the halacha. Is it valid if you have a get that the date is yesterday and it wasn't actually signed until tomorrow? So the Gemara says it makes a lot of sense. According to Reb Shimon, it's valid because you don't have any issues. The only concern, the only reason for the date at all is to make sure that the wife can prove her ownership of the fruits, and that begins from yesterday, from the time that it was written, not the time that it was signed, so there's no problem. According to Chachamim, the reason is to prevent her from being able to get away with znos. That happens after the time of the writing of the date and before it actually becomes effective, and therefore they hold that there is a problem. That makes sense. However, according to Reish Lakish, what is going to be the difference between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim? What do they argue about? So Gemara says, Reish Lakish will tell you very simply. They argue as to when does the woman take control of the fruits. According to Reb Shimon, the woman takes control of the fruits from the time that he decides to divorce her, and therefore the date is valid. It's an accurate reflection of when she took control of the fruits. According to the Chachamim, she only takes control of the fruits when he actually gives it. It's signed and he gives it. And that didn't happen at the time that the date says. It happened much later. And therefore she'll be able to take the get, which has a previous date, and go collect fruits that does not rightfully belong to her. She'll take it away from her husband, and she could even take it away from people who bought it from him. So another thing where I ask, the problem is that these two opinions we see elsewhere are reversed. We have that Rav Yochanan says that the actual time that the get becomes effective is from the time that it's written, and Reish Lakish says it's from the time that it's given, which is the opposite understanding of the Chacham, the way we're saying it here. So Gemara says switch it around. It has to be reversed. All right, now the Gemara has a kasha on the entire concept of the date here. The Gemara says that Abaye asked Rav Yosef. There's a brayso that lists 3 types of gittin that are puzzle, but if she uses them and she has a child, the child doesn't become a mamzer. It means we don't start canceling things after the fact, after it was used. So Abaye asked, so then what's the point in having the rule? You have to have the date altogether. One of those examples is that you have to put the date on the get. So it means even if you didn't have the date on the get, you would not say that it was puzzle after the fact, and the children are born from a second marriage based on that get are kosher children. They're not mamzer. So Gemara says, then what's the point? They'll still be able to get away with it. We said put on a date. So he'll say, I won't put on a date. And he could use the get, and it's kosher, and it works. And you'll still have all the problems that Chazal are afraid of. Someone says, no, you're not going to be able to use it, because since Chazal said you have to have a date on it, if he doesn't put a date on it, the seifrim, the people who write the get for the court, aren't going to do it for him. He won't be able to get hold of a get without a date on it, because Chazal said you have to have a date, and therefore won't be able to pull this trick that he wants to do. Someone says, yeah, he can. He could take the date, he could have it be the wrong date, and he could cut off the date. I'll cut a little hole where the date is written, and cut it off. And now you have a get without a date on it, and he could use that and pull the same trick. So Gemara says we're not concerned with such a trickery, an open ball-faced trick where he obviously cut out the date and he's obviously hiding it. People are going to do things like that. We're not concerned about that. All right, now the Gemara has another similar exchange. You have a brisa that says that if it says on if the date that's written is very non-specific, like for example, if it says which Shemitah cycle we're in, or it says which year we're in, or which month, or which week, but it doesn't specify which day we're in. What is the halacha about that? Gemara says it's kosher. If it's kosher, you could still play games because you could have it written for this week, and we won't know which week it is, and we won't know which day it is within the week, and the two problems which we discussed earlier could still happen. Gemara says you're right; it won't completely solve the problems, but it will solve the problem for after this week. You won't be able to claim if there's a znus that happens before this week. You won't be able to claim that she was divorced at the time because you see it happen within this week. Or if she wants to collect fruits that happened that are from after that, if he sells fruits that are from after this week, she'll be able to collect them because you'll see clearly on it when it happened. So the Gemara says, and you have to say that that's a valid use, because otherwise there's no end to it, because the date doesn't say the hour, so you can have the same confusion as to which hour did this not happen, or which hour did the fruits that get sold, was he allowed to use them or not. So therefore you see, you only have to have a date of some point, at least it has some validity and helps in some way.